Okay. Now, for regular fractions, and if I say regular fractions, what is it that you think of? What is a regular fraction? Yeah, Mia. 2/4. Where your numerator is smaller than your denominator. And it doesn't have a whole number with it. Okay? So we're not talking about improper fractions. We're not talking about mixed numbers as of yet. We'll get to those in a minute. For regular fractions, I'm going to use what's called a benchmark. And the benchmarks are going to be 0, half, or whole. I'll get a fraction, a regular fraction, and I'll determine what that fraction is closest to. Does it have a value closer to 0, half, or 1 whole? Okay, and I'll use those benchmarks to help determine that. So if we look at something like if we look at something like a 5/12, so we're going to add it to a 1/15. I'm going to take each of these fractions and round them individually before I do my adding in this case. Now for 5/12, think of what you have for twelfths. How many 12s would equal 0 as your benchmark 0? Chris? 0. How many 12s would equal half? Chris? And how many would equal 1 whole? Okay. So that's ultimately what you're going to be focusing on. Is this 5/12 closest to 0/12, which would be 0, 6/12, which would be half, or 12/12, which represents the whole? Yeah, 6/12, which represents half. So I'm going to use that half when I add. Now let's focus on the 1/15. Now, because your denominator is odd, it might make the half a little bit more challenging, but it's not so bad. So we need to figure out 0, half, or 1 for 1/15. Well, 0 is represented by 0/15. 1 whole is represented by 15/15. What do I do for half with an odd denominator? Alex? 7.5. Or you could say 7 or 8, right? Somewhere in that ballpark. Okay? So now I look at 1/15. Is that closest to 0/15, 7.5/15, or 15/15? 0. So I'm going to round that to be 0. What is half plus 0? And there it is. It's a long process to draw it out. It's not necessarily a long process to do it in your head. Okay? So if you see one like 3/5 minus 1/8, and you use those benchmarks for each, and then do the subtraction, what comes to mind? What are you going to do with 3/5? To what? 0, half, or 1? We're going to round it. We're going to go to half. And then what about the 1/8? So half minus 0 give you half. Uh, 7/8 minus 5/9. 7/8. 0, half, or 1. 5/9. They're not all going to be half. Any questions on that process with regular fractions? mixed numbers. We will round to the nearest whole. So for example, if I look at 9 and 1/11, I need to determine if that is closer to 9 or if that's closer to 10 if I'm looking at the nearest whole. Now, what's the magic number when you round using decimals or you round just regular integers? Yeah, 5. But you're not going to have a 5. You're going to have a fraction. What fraction best represents 5? Five. No, not. What fraction best represents that 5? 5 is about what in relation to 0 and 10? Halfway in between, right? That's why if it's 5 or greater, we round up. So if your fraction is half or greater, you'll round up. How does 1/11 compare to half? Right, so this is that going to make this 9 turn into a 10 because you got 1/11 with it? That's going to stay at a 9. Now 7/9 is going to bring this whole thing up to 4 because 7/9 is greater than half. We're going to round the 3 up to the 4. Therefore,
I like this better.
get 5. All right. So 5 3/5 plus 3 2/3. First I round 5 3/5. What's the relationship to half with 3/5? It's half of 5. So this 5 turns to a, and then 2/3 equals 10. To be honest, usually the biggest problem with these kinds is making sure that you add when you're supposed to add, subtract when you're supposed to subtract.
I forgot that we're not supposed to do like if it's lower than 5 or if it's like bigger than 5.
5 is just half. Yeah. Okay. Try those two. 2 1/8 rounds to 2. 3 6/7 rounds to 2 times 4. 7 3/5 divided by 1 1/2. I would usually recommend that we round that one first. Round what you're dividing by first, just in case. So this should be, because it's half, 2. Now 7 3/5, if you round it the way you're supposed to round it, is going to round to be 8. But if it didn't, say this was 7 2/5, you'd say, oh, 7 isn't divisible by 2. What number closest to 7 would be divisible by 2? You might say 8, and you might just adjust it anyway. But that's why I recommend do this one first. Usually they work out, but in the event that they don't, either you didn't round this correctly, or they're messing with you. What?
Okay, so why did we round 2 and 1/8? I mean, did not round.
We did. 1/8 is 1/8 is less than half. How many eighths would give us exactly half? 4? Yeah. Half is 4/8. That 1/8 is less, so therefore that 2 stays the way it is.
We got a worksheet. Let's go. Man, these worksheets are big.
You can say 3 guys.
It's so hard, I don't think that.
No, I like the woodward better.
Oh, you complain if I hung you with a new rope.
No, it's not, because you ain't gotta lug that big old book.
All right. There you go.